Hello. I think let's start now.
Let us
I
begin.
think we have.
All right.
So, hi guys, and welcome to the Smoke Shop. Uh,
This is Click With Us by the Science Club and Pixels of IISER Pune.
yeah,
I am Kavya Thalyaparambil, a first year.
and I'm Darya, also first year. We'll be hosting this, and we also have Arjun, Raja, and Vikram, who will be sharing their work and their techniques with us today.
But before we begin, we will start with a basic primer in just a few photographic technicalities that our speakers will be using as they present.
Right. So, photography has this thing called an exposure triangle, which are basically the three variables of a camera you can control that changes how the image looks, that changes how bright the image is, how contrasty it is, and it also changes the look of the image. I'll be expounding on that a little later. And those three are aperture, shutter speed, and sensitivity. So, shutter speed is also known as exposure time. That's the word I'll be using. So let me start with aperture. And aperture is basically how wide is the lens through which the light is coming in. So I have a 50 millimeter lens here with me. This is 50 millimeters, Nikon uh, AFD. That's just letters. So if you can see it, it has a hold up and uh, it has a pretty wide maximum aperture. That is because it is an f by 1.8 lens. Aperture is measured in f-stops. So you say where f is the focal length of the lens. So f by 1.8 would mean 50 divided by 1.8 millimeters is the width of the aperture. And it can stop down slowly and slowly to f by 22, which would be around 2 millimeters. And I don't think you can see anything. And obviously, the wider the aperture, the more the light comes in, and you can then go for a faster technique. Now, one thing I would like to note, and we'll demonstrate later, is that aperture also affects something known as the depth of field, which is how wide the range of focus is. So at f by 1.8, when you have a wider aperture or a smaller f-stop, you have a very shallow depth of field in that things blur quite easily. Uh, Kavya, can you show the examples of that?
Sure, I can do it
Uh,
right now.
yeah, and you also have these like balls forming around called bokeh balls. So yes, this was shot at f by 1.8, and if you could zoom in, uh, you'll see that only part of the leaves are in focus and most of it is out of focus. That is how thin the depth of field is. This is barely, I mean, okay, this is a pretty deep plant. It's around a meter and a half in diameter. And as you can see, like the background is all just blurred out. Uh, could you show, however, when you stop down the lens, when you go to a lower f-stop, this was shot at, I believe, f by 16 or f
11.
by 11. F by 11. Thanks. And you can see, like, everything is sharp now. You can count the bars in the windows. And that is how aperture matters. You generally use faster apertures in portraiture of course, you can use them anywhere, but you generally use them to isolate subjects, to blur out the background. Uh, so that is about aperture. Again, it's measured by f-stop, and the larger the number, it's key to remember, the larger the number, the smaller the aperture. It's inversely proportional and it's a little unintuitive. Now coming on to shutter speed. The shutter speed is controlled by the camera shutter, obviously. And obviously, when you have a longer exposure time, you get more light on the sensor, the brighter the image. Shorter exposure times give you shorter, darker images. However, you generally try to use shorter, like around at least faster than a fraction of a second, around 1/20th, because you're generally hand holding the camera. So at longer shutter speeds, your hand moves the camera and you can notice that. So there is blur in your image. I'll just show you what. So I set my camera to 1/20th of a second and it's a slightly slower shutter. And if I set it to 1/4000th of a second, that is how fast most cameras go. Some go up to 1/8000th. Pretty impressive. And you generally use this when you've got something very fast in the frame and you want to just freeze that. So Arjun will go on to talk about bird photography. He'll be talking about this, how he uses faster shutter speeds. You can also sometimes use longer shutter speeds, such as my camera goes up to 30 seconds, but here's a 1 second exposure. And you generally use these to paint light, to play with stuff for star trails, which Rajat will be talking about. And also, Kavya, could you show the crazy image? Okay, 1 minute. Hold on, just zoom in. This was at f/8, and this is what I meant by you want to keep a high shutter speed. If you zoom into this, it's all blurred because my hand moved, and you can just see the leaves have shifted a little everywhere. Let me not accumulate some dust on this. However, sometimes it can be done aesthetically, and you get stuff like this, which is basically just city lights, but my hand moved so much that it kind of looks cool. Yeah. So that's how you use shutter speed. So exposure times are measured in seconds. So obviously, 1/4000th of a second means the shutter is open for 1/4000th of a second. 1 second is 1 second. There is supposed to be a rule of thumb that you try to keep a shutter speed inversely proportional to your focal length to prevent blurring. But the thing about that is, like, it doesn't factor in how close your subject is. So it's generally trial and error to see, but I've shot images at 1/20th of a second, and they have come out still. But yeah, it depends from situation to situation. So yeah, that's it about speed.
Thank you, Dharia.
There, I had a question. So if smaller shutter speeds, which are like 1/4000, so good. So why don't I always keep shutter speeds low if I want to
Because
capture
a very dark image? 1/4000th of a second is not enough for light collection, right? The thing is, most cameras are not very wide aperture cameras. If you see, take my image for example, my current frame, you can see my bed in focus, the bookshelf in focus, and that is around 2.5-3 meters behind me. So it has pretty big depth of field, and therefore it probably has a very tiny aperture. So what this implies
What's depth of field?
depth of field is the depth of field is the range in which you have focus, right? So again, Kavya, could you show those images again?
Yeah, I mean, depth of field would be the distance from your camera
No,
to
that
another
is
distance at which is in focus.
that is focusing distance. Depth of field is the distances which are in focus. Yeah.
That's
So no.
difference in, yeah, just a second. Something's up.
Yes, okay. We've had our share of technical
yes,
errors.
okay.
It's fine. So, like for example, over here, depth of field extends from like the tip of these leaves, down back to those windows in the background. But and that is characteristic of small apertures. So, point is, most cameras have small lenses and small apertures, so they don't have that much light gathering capacity, which is why you try to use longer exposure times to get a proper well exposed photograph.
I'll be talking about one more thing as well, but before that, you can also see the difference between these two images, that there's already a difference in brightness. That because this one's aperture is larger, it was able to collect more light than this one.
Yes, right.
And all right, so all right. So apart from aperture and exposure time, which both affect the amount of light that enters the camera, finally you need to be able to sense it, right? And that's where your sensors come in. This is there's something called the sensitivity of your sensor, and well, you guessed it, it affects the sensitivity of your sensor. And the lower your sensitivity, the less light it will take in per unit time. And the higher your sensitivity, the more light it will pick up. This might seem as a solution to the small exposure time and small aperture problem, except that there is something else, right? You have something called static, that your sensor is just always picking up. Think of it as background noise, that it's just randomly picking up here and there, just random pixels up and down. And this happens at some level. And the more sensitive your sensors are, the more of this noise they pick up. And I will show you I'll show you an example where too much noise really comes to affect your image. And just a second. Yeah, here it is. You see all of this, these very colorful grains that totally get in the way of totally get in the way of your image, right? I mean, you can't even see the flowers clearly, and of course they affect the sharpness of this image. Like you can't tell the boundaries of the petals very easily. And so you want to reduce this noise. Okay, unfortunately we haven't included an example of low sensitivity, but keeping your sensitivity low to around, okay, so sensitivity is measured in multiples of 100 ISO. So you have 100, some cameras can do up to 25600 or 51200, sorry, 512,000. And yeah, this one was shot at 256,000. However, you can sometimes use this to your advantage. This is where the texture of the graininess is actually used for an aesthetic on the light and on the chair. It's very clear. So
yeah. I would just like to basically sit here. Like the effects you described, like low depth of field, shallow depth of field, high depth of field, blur, all of that, it can make a bad image, but it can also make a good image. It's basically a tool you have at your disposal. You can use it whichever way you want. It's not exactly a problem in an image, so to speak. It is if you don't want it there, but if you do, this is how you get it.
and these three parameters make up the exposure triangle. Any questions, or we can move on to our speakers?
So one question, can we do this all on our phone, and if we can, how do we do it?
I'm sorry, come again?
Like, can we vary all these parameters on our phone?
I have tried with phones. I don't think you can vary aperture on phones because they already have a lot of limits. Like a phone lens isn't very mobile. But I think you can definitely change shutter speed and sensitivity. And
A lot of phones allow you to change those two. Yes.
Yeah. The general idea is to go to the pro mode, or like more and then pro.
Either pro or manual, depending on.
Pro, manual, it's basically the fanciest sounding name.
Exactly. The things that give you a lot of controls, those ones.
Yeah. And over there, you do have controls like for ISO, for shutter speed. But I don't think I don't think they have that physical mechanism to change their aperture. Most phones do not.
All right. There's another thing I think we should touch upon before moving to our speakers, because they will be using this. The focal distance, which is basically at which distance an object, which distance is in focus, basically. At what distance away from the lens something can be in focus. And yeah, it can be a short distance at which things in the back will be blurry, or it can be a long distance in which case things in the foreground will be blurry. Bouquet, whichever, yes. And yeah, now we can move on to our first speaker.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Arjun. I'm in the first year. Yeah, hi. And I'm going to be talking about wildlife photography. So I'll just share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. So the basics, so shutter speed, when you're photographing wild, actually before all this, mainly in wildlife photography, you want to have high telephoto lenses, which have high focal length. So this is the camera I have. You can see it's got a pretty big lens. Because you're going to be in the field and animals are going to be far, and you want to be able to zoom in on them. So with really wide angle lenses, you're not going to really be able to capture animals that well. So the basics. So coming to shutter speed, you generally want to have higher shutter speeds because animals are going to keep moving around, and you want to be able to freeze the motion. So you have high shutter speeds. And then aperture. So you know how you see those photos and the animals in sharp focus, but everything in the background is completely blurred. That's because you have low f-stops and a wide open aperture. So that narrows your depth of field, and you get to see only a certain amount of the region in focus. So the background is completely blurred out. Then different cameras have many modes with which you can shoot. So there's something called shutter priority mode, which means you set your shutter speed to what you want, and the camera determines the aperture, ISO, and everything based on the surroundings, or rather the whole image, whatever it sees using software. So then many people want to use manual mode, where you set everything with auto ISO. That means you set the shutter speed and aperture, but the camera determines your ISO. This is simple because you can control your aperture, you can have low f-stops, you can also control your shutter speed, so you can decide how much is too much. Like say you use completely auto mode, then the camera decides that there's too less light, and it moves to a really slow shutter speed. Then you take photos and your image is going to be completely blurred because of motion blur. But if you choose manual mode with auto ISO, you set your shutter speed, you can probably correct for exposure in post. So when you're at home, you can use some software and bump up the exposure, but you can't do that if your image is overexposed because you would be losing data. Then some photographers also use aperture priority mode, where you set the aperture and the shutter speed and ISO are changed. However, if you go with manual mode and auto ISO, you might want to have control of even your ISO. So say you have an animal on top of a lake and the lake's reflecting the sky. So you try to take a pic of your animal, say it's a duck. So the duck is generally dark in color and the lake is going to be completely white because it's reflecting the sky, So if you use auto ISO, maybe, the camera looks at the whole image and decides, okay, I want to expose the lake correctly. I want that to have detail. Then the lake is going to be exposed correctly, but your duck is going to be completely black. It will be completely dark and you lose data there. So then you can't even bump up the exposure in post and, get back your image. So autofocus. So you know that autofocus exists. You basically half press your shutter button, or if you have some focus button, you press that and the camera gets the subject into focus. So it does that based on the contrast between what you're pointing at and the background. So there are different autofocus modes. One is single autofocus, where you half press the button once and the camera focuses, but then it doesn't change that focal point. So only that will be in focus. So say an animal moves towards you or moves away from you, it will go out of focus. Then you have continuous autofocus mode, where the camera continuously adjusts the autofocus based on the subject. So the animal's moving around, it'll adjust it. It'll keep it in focus. And then there's hybrid mode, which many cameras have, where it switches between the two modes based on the situation. So it would mostly use single autofocus when you're taking a photo of a mountain or something. But if you're getting some movement in there, it'll use continuous autofocus. So yeah, for wildlife, obviously you're going to want to have the second two options, not single autofocus, because then you'll just ruin a lot of your shots if it's focused once and you can't, and the animal moves away. Then there are also area modes in autofocus. So when you look through your viewfinder, you see a bunch of dots that are arranged in a pattern, right? So those are autofocus, those are focal points. So the area mode is basically considering those points, and you can set how the camera wants to consider these areas. So first is single point autofocus. So you set one point out of all those points that you have, and only what is there is taken into focus. Like only that is considered when choosing the focal distance. Next, you have dynamic focus points. So you choose a point, and if your animal moves around, the camera tracks that point using that point and the surrounding points. Then you have 3D tracking, which is really similar to dynamic focus, which is you pick an autofocus point and the camera automatically activates as many focus points from the whole screen as needed. Then you have auto area autofocus, where the camera does everything. You just point and shoot. You wouldn't prefer to have auto because say you're taking a photo of a bird in a tree and there are some leaves in the front. If you were able to choose the focal point, you would choose what hits that bird most accurately and you would get it in focus. But if you had auto, maybe the bird comes in focus, maybe your leaves come in focus, maybe it picks something behind the tree and tries to focus on that. And time is of the essence in wildlife photography because animals keep moving around. So if you're trying to wrestle your camera and get it to focus on what you want, it might just move away and you'll lose a shot. So you would prefer to go with dynamic or 3D tracking focus points, area modes. So that will be most useful for wildlife photography. Then we come to exposure. So when you're working with wildlife, you want to use higher shutter speed, obviously, because it gives you sharper photos. But then you have to balance it out because you might not have enough light. And one really important thing is that when you're taking photos of wildlife, you're going to be in the field, and the amount of sunlight you have is really going to affect how much you can play around with your settings. So if it's really sunny, you have direct rays and all that, you can really have high shutter speeds and wide open apertures and all that, and low ISO. But then if it's cloudy, you might have to adjust your shutter speed or go for higher ISO, which means more noise. And one really important thing that you need to do is take a few test photos and get your settings right so that, when you actually do see something, you don't have to mess around with your controls trying to get your exposure correct, and then it goes and you're sad. Then another thing is that the light source should be behind you, not the subject. Again, think what's going to happen if your animal is in front of the light. You're not going to really be able to expose your animal correctly. And if you overexpose your image, the background is going to be completely blown out. So yeah, when you have a cloudy sky, the background's completely white. So it's going to be really hard to expose that correctly. Like in this image, there's a bird here. You expose the bird correctly, but then the background is completely white. So you can't really do much about that. You're going to lose detail here. But at least this part is correctly exposed, which is what mostly matters. So we come to composition, or rather how you want to frame your image. One rule that many people follow is the rule of thirds. So you basically place a 2x2 grid on your image. You imagine these lines, right, when you're shooting. You divide it into vertical and horizontal thirds. So this rule basically says you place the most interesting part of your image or your subject at the intersection of these lines or along these lines. And that's going to lead to more interesting and better photos, because they have done some psychological analysis and found this, but it's just a guideline, and you don't have to really follow it all the time. Based on the situation, you can break it, not use it, whatever. So one really important thing is that the eye of your animal should be in focus. So people always look at the eye, and that's really important. You have to keep it in focus, not just the tail or the back or something. So the head and eye area are important. And finally, the background and foreground are also important. You should be able to have a good background or something good in the foreground, but that shouldn't distract from your main subject. So if you're in the field, this might mean you move around a little here or there, just so that your background is correct. Like say you have a fence in the front, and you get up on some rock or something to get over the fence, because you don't want that to be in the foreground and ruin your image. Or say the background, if you stand here, there are some buildings. If you stand there's no buildings. You would obviously try and get the buildings out of your shot. So then when you're working with wildlife, you're going to be pretty far from them. So obviously you're going to have to crop if you don't have a really high power telephoto lens or something. You're not going to be able to get the animal to be big in your image. Then you're going to have to crop. So here are some guidelines. You have to give the animal some breathing room, right? Don't crop too much and completely fill the frame with just the animal. So I feel like here in the left image, this is really overcropped, because all you see is this. But in the right, you can see this forms a cutout, and here there's a bird and there's a pot and everything, and it kind of fits together like a puzzle. So I would say this is much better. And if your animal is looking to one side, you want to crop that it's looking into the image rather than outside. So on the left, it's done wrong. It's looking out of the image. If someone's looking at it, they don't really know what it's looking at. It doesn't really look that good. But on the right, you're trying to create the illusion that it's looking at this stuff here, even though it may not be. You have it looking into the center of your image, and that's going to be much better. So finally, you're going to be in the field when you're photographing wildlife. So there are some general guidelines that apply to this, even not strictly related to photography. So you want to wear dull clothing and don't bring any attention to yourself. Be quiet. Don't wear bright reds, neon colors and all that, because that's going to scare the animals away. It may stress them out. And not only is it going to ruin your chances of getting a good photo, it's also harmful for the environment. And you shouldn't have strong deodorants or perfumes, again, for the same reason. And don't get too close to animals. This is really important, especially with, you're basically stressing out the birds, and stuff like, for small birds, moving around may require a lot of energy from them. So you're basically creating unnecessary stresses for them. So don't really get too close to them. Don't try and, intrude upon them, especially if they're nesting, right? You shouldn't get too close, because if the birds see that you're too close to their nest, they don't want to go to it, because they don't want to expose their nest location to you. And also, there are some birds that need to feed their young every few minutes. So if you're standing around for a long time, the children are gonna miss out on food, and that might even kill them. And also, one thing, if you really do want to get closer to the animal, may still from a safe distance, if you're looking straight at it and you walk straight towards it, it's gonna definitely get spooked out really easily and go away, run away, fly away, whatever. So one method you could try is the meander. So you basically walk around, look uninterested, don't really look at the animal, you observe random stuff near you and all that, and movement is sort of random, but you do it such that by the end of it, you're slightly closer to the animal than you were before. So then the animal's not likely to run away. It might think you're just some guy wandering around, and that might help you get a better shot. And one really important thing is to know what you're going to look for. So studying the behavior of certain animals beforehand is helpful. Like say you're trying to photograph fantails. They're really lively birds. So they're always jumping around, always moving. So if you're going to want to photograph them, you can't really have low shutter speeds. That will just lead to a blurry mess all the time. So if you know this beforehand, you can be prepared for it. But you don't know this, you're in the field, your photo's bad. And one really important thing is to shoot from eye level. So this was in a beach and I was on my belly for like 5 minutes, slowly getting close to the lizard. And finally, I was able to get this good shot. So you can think about how ineffective this would be if I was standing, towering over it and pointing straight down and trying to get a photo of it that way versus what this is. So you always want to shoot from eye level. So this might mean, standing or kneeling, maybe even on your belly. But it really helps create much better photos. And finally, you want to have stability, right? You're shooting handheld. There's going to be some motion blur from that. So if you have access to a tripod, you can use a tripod or even a monopod. But if you don't have that, use any support you can find, like some fence or some bench, probably even someone else's shoulder or something. But shooting handheld is going to be unstable, and using some support will lead to better stability. That means, say you're working with lesser light, because usually you want to do something like bird watching, you're going to be in the early morning or in the evening, you're going to have less light at that time. So you're going to have most likely lower shutter speeds. So that would lead to motion blur if you're shooting handheld. Your hand's going to be shaking. But if you use some support, you'll get sharper pictures. And that's about it. So thank you, guys. Any questions?
How long were you crawling?
5 minutes.
Was it worth it up there?
I mean, it was for me.
The results speak for themselves, I guess.
Yeah. So I'm done here.
Hey, thanks, Arjun. That was pretty nice. Okay, one small clarification. When you mean shoot from eye level, you mean the animal's eye level, right?
Yeah, not the animal, not necessarily, but yes. Basically, your eye should be at the same level as the animal.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you don't want to shoot like this. You're not going to really be able to get a good. So your eye level is given, but yeah, also the animal's eye level.
Yeah, one more doubt I had. If there is screen in your camera where you can look what the image is, why do you always look in the viewfinder?
Well, the viewfinder, one thing, you're going to have stability looking at it like this. You can hold it up to your eye. And another thing is that it's just much easier to use. And the viewfinder, basically, it's more accurate. The light comes off the mirror and into your viewfinder. But then you're going to be looking at an LCD screen that might not have the best colors or the best brightness. So say you're in a sunny environment, you're looking at some dull LCD screen compared to the viewfinder where the light's coming directly to your eyes. The viewfinder is always better.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Arjun. That was a really great presentation and really great photographs. Thanks a lot. Any last questions from the audience? We can move on to our second speaker, Rajat, who will be talking about astrophotography.
As his DP itself suggests.
Yeah, okay. So, hello everyone. I'm Rajat Shinde, second year BSMS student, and I'm the coordinator of Akash Ganga. And in today's session, like in 20 or 25 minutes, I will be going through some of my pics. I'll show you some of the tips and tricks and techniques, the do's and don'ts when it comes to taking astro pics. And so I have some 20 or 25 minutes. So let's get started. I'll share my screen. Just tell me if it's. Is right?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. So first things first, when it comes to astrophotography, you people might have looked at some very beautiful pictures of starry night, some beautiful landscape, and the sky is filled with so many stars and or say there is a big band of Milky Way. It looks just so beautiful. And along with young people might have seen on Instagram some nebula pics, colorful nebula pics. So the thing is, you might think you may need telescope or very fancy instruments or very expensive cameras and all. So firstly, you actually don't need telescope. And even with a very basic professional camera, you can take some very beautiful pics. And the third point is that you don't even need all of these. If you have a simple smartphone camera, then also you can do pretty amazing pics. So this was the recent full moon on Wednesday, and ISO. So taking astrophotography is basically managing the ISO and shutter speed, nothing else. So you always want to take astro pics with the manual mode. You don't want to just go outside and with your camera and take random pics. You want to place your settings to manual mode and then check the ISO and shutter speed. So this pic was taken with ISO of 3200 with a fraction of shutter speed, nothing special. And also if you have a good camera which can zoom a lot, then you can create some very beautiful, you can capture some beautiful craters on the moon also. So this pic might not look very much interesting, but there is a thing I want to show here. And it is important for one reason. I'll come in a bit. I'll come in a moment. I had taken this pic from my ground. You see the pole over here. This is the volleyball court pole, and I didn't have a tripod, so I basically tied my camera onto this pole. And you can see the Taurus constellation here if you're attentive, and you can also see the Pleiades cluster over here. I'll come back into this photo for a moment, because this photo is important for a reason. So with a good enough zoom, you can try to capture the moon in its crescent form. Why? If you zoom in, you'll see quite some interesting things happening. Can you see over here? There is a discontinuity, right? This part is illuminated when all of the rest of the surrounding is dark. And over here also, the crescent boundary stops over here, but you still see some, I think there is a value over here. That's why you're able to see the light portion coming from this region too. And by itself, the whole dark region of the moon is quite illuminated. Why? It is because of a phenomena called as earth shine. It is when the reflected light from the earth shines on the moon. So ISO, I think 1600 or 3200, and shutter speed was low, because if you have a bigger shutter speed or bigger exposure time, then this whole region will dominate and it will look like a mess, it will almost look like a full moon. So any guesses? I've taken this pic with the mobile camera or professional camera. Anybody would like to guess? The answer is, I've taken this with mobile camera. ISO is say 300 or 400. Shutter speed is 32 seconds. And you can recognize, some of you might have recognized this constellation. This is Scorpio 1. And also while you're shooting stars and all, you always want to look something interesting in the sky, right? You can't just randomly go out and take your mobile camera and shoot. You want something interesting to be present in the sky. So why I find this region interesting is that I wanted to capture the Milky Way, which is somewhere over here, but I wasn't, because fairly obvious reasons that I live in the city. But still, living in a city and you are able to capture so many stars is an achievement in itself, and that too with a mobile camera. So as far as possible, you want to avoid the moon to get into your starry night pics, but I wanted to get a composite photo of the moon with the Pleiades cluster, the Taurus, Orion, along with a few trees. So that's why I took this pic. But as far as possible, you want to avoid the moon, because it just adds so much of light pollution and noise into your pics. So this also was taken with a mobile camera, 32-second shutter speed and ISO of say 200. So yeah, just a beautiful pic, right? And can you believe it that this pic was taken with a mobile camera? There are just so many stars. It is practically impossible to count. But I also want you to notice something. Look at this tree over here. And you might have recognized that this pic and this pic, they are actually the same. But in this pic, you are able to capture so many stars. However, in this pic, there are just a few stars. So I'll tell you the reason why in a few moments. So this is the same pic stacked, processed in a different way. So this is the iconic Scorpio constellation with the bright Arcturus. And you might be able to see some fuzzy red thing, reddish orangish thing over here. I suppose it is the Milky Way, the bright region of the Milky Way, but it's still not visible. But still, you are able to capture so many stars with just a mobile camera. This was with shutter speed of 32 seconds. Larger shutter speed means you are able to place your camera and capture as much light as possible, because the stars are quite faint and point sources of light. So you want to maximize the time you are exposing your camera to the sky. Beautiful. That's all I can say. You can just keep scrolling and the stars won't stop coming. So a fun fact, can anyone think what might have been causing this region of light pollution?
Street light, car light. Yeah, I was wondering the same.
The answer is actually quite interesting and funny. It is the IISER Pune campus. So actually, I live quite close to the IISER Pune campus, right? So you might, if you focus carefully, you might be able to see this constellation. Anyone can guess what this constellation is? One, two.
Rajat sir, I know what it is.
Yes, Nishant sir, please go ahead.
I think it is Big Dipper.
Precisely.
Thank you, Rajat sir.
Thank you. So, and also one thing, that all these pictures I've taken with my mobile camera. So even with mobile camera, you are able to capture so many stars. It's a big achievement in itself. ISO 300 or 400 and shutter speed of 32 seconds. And I've tried to reduce the noise pollution. I've tried to reduce the red light, green light, but I've let the blue light be in the original format. Because if I reduce the blue light also, then the whole picture will become a PW format, black and white. So with a simple zoom and some clever editing, you can capture the features of the moon. This is the biggest crater on the moon. It's called the Tycho crater. And you can also see some very bright regions of the moon. So actually this pic was originally of 150 MB. And I didn't want to spoil my computer or phone, so I took a screenshot and deleted the original. That's why you may observe the pixels over here. And you see the bright regions of the moon here, here, here. They're actually caused due to meteorite impacts. In the black regions are lava flows, ancient lava flows. Might have guessed. So look at this pic.
Bhaiya, the previous pic was taken by camera or phone camera or?
No, this pic was taken with professional camera, because with phone camera it's just impossible to zoom in that far away. Right. This was taken with my trusty Canon 540HS. It's a professional camera, and this pic is also taken with my professional camera, and so was this pic. Now this pic will look very dull and boring, and as I've told you, you'll see the Taurus constellation over here and the Pleiades cluster over here. You can see, right? And here is the pole. But I want you to notice the pole and this is the same pole. But you are able to capture so many stars. So the catch is that this is not a single image. So I've taken multiple images with, so the thing is my professional camera has some limitations that it can allow a maximum shutter speed of 15 seconds only. And if my shutter speed is greater than 1 second, so say 15 seconds, then the ISO is automatically fixed to a value of 80, which is quite low. So the thing is, I've taken multiple pics like this, some 10 or 12 pics from this configuration without disturbing the camera. And I use those 10 or 12 pics to stack them using a software. The software is called Sequator. And when you stack it, you're essentially superimposing and aligning all the stars. You're accumulating all the pixels. So with that effect, you are able to see the faintest of the faintest stars. You won't see such amount of stars with your naked eye. So you see, you'll able to see this. Anyone can guess what this is?
The Orion Nebula.
Yeah.
It's word.
Sorry. Yeah, it's a pretty famous nebula, and you may observe that this doesn't actually look like a star. It's kind of fuzzy mess, right? And all these smaller stars over here, I would say they are actually of magnitude 9, 8 or 9, but still you are able to capture so many stars, and that too from the city with a clever process called stacking. You essentially take that you equal and similar, like you don't capture this region and in the second pic you don't want to capture this region, then they won't align, right? You want the same configuration, even the pole shouldn't move, because I was disturbing the camera while I was clicking the pics. That's why you will see this distortion effect and the color effect over here. So you don't want to disturb your camera while you're taking those 10 or 12 pics. But just notice the sheer amount of stars you are able to capture. So this is the same pic. The pole is over here, and notice Pleiades. It looks quite different now, right? It looks much more beautiful now, and just the amount of stars have also increased. And all this thanks to the process of stacking. Beautiful thing, just a bit of light pollution over here. The same thing. Oops, spoiler. So I have a friend
I had
who
a
lives
question
in
the previous photo. If you don't touch the camera, how do you take the next photo?
I set the camera on a timer of 5 seconds. So when I click it, it will move a bit, but in 5 seconds, it will stabilize to that original point, right?
Okay. And also why the craters were shining, the meteor impact craters that in the moon photo, the previous one.
They were what? Right.
They were shining, you told. Yeah, why are the craters glowing, the meteor impact craters?
Yeah, because they are craters. So the thing is that, wait, if I get time in the last 5 or 10 minutes, because I have to show quite some many pics, I'll come back to the craters and all.
Okay, sure.
So I have a friend who lives in the city area, and he took a lot of pics. I told him to take similar identical pics at night of the Orion region, and he sent them to me on Telegram, and then I stacked them. And still, while living in the city region, you are able to capture so many stars. It's just amazing. And you see the distortion over here. Like you always want to avoid trees or buildings or anything that might ruin your final process pic. coming back to that for this pic, I want you to notice something. You may notice that there is a sharp boundary over here. Oh, in this region, the pixels are quite smooth, but in this region, you might observe that there are a lot of tiny star-like things running close to the boundary of the tree, right? Here too. But here it is smooth. The reason is that while stacking, I'm selecting a sky region, right? So while selecting the sky region, it's quite difficult to select all the night sky region when you have a very random thing like a tree over here. So the same pic edited in a different way. And it's all with the help of mobile camera and processing to laptop. You can take such pics and process them and you will find very similar pics. You can create such similar pics. And there are so many stars, even from city region. So yeah, kaboom. This pic actually blew my mind. I didn't expect it to be so good. So I haven't actually taken this pic, but I'll take 80% credits for it. So the thing is, I have a friend in Ahmednagar. He lives in a quite less polluted village, and he has a better camera. By better camera, I mean that this camera can take a maximum shutter speed of 32 seconds and also allow a flexible ISO. So I told him, so he was sleeping at 12:30. So I called him, I told him, hey bro, what are you doing? He told, I'm sleeping. So I told him that take your camera, go onto your roof and place the ISO, fix the ISO to 300 or 400 and place the shutter speed to 32 seconds and look at the southern eastern part of the sky. You might see the Scorpio constellation. If you don't see the Scorpio constellation, you will definitely see the bright red Arcturus star, and take 10 or 12 pics and send them to me on Telegram. So the original pics, they were of 10 MB each, and he took 15 pics. So 10 times 15 is the total quality of the image is of 150 MB. So I took a screenshot and deleted the original. What a clever thing to do. But you're able to capture the Milky Way. So in the original pics, this region wasn't at all visible. In the original pic, you could say is these stars, the Scorpio stars, this big red one, and this star, the brightest stars you were able to see. But this whole region wasn't even visible in the original pics. But once you process them, once you stack them, once you accumulate them on top of each other, then the final image will represent the inner beauty. It will sort of bring out the inner details of the Milky Way. So why I told southern eastern part of the sky is because you want to plan your astrophotography, right? So this is the thicker, bigger, brighter part of the Milky Way, and it lies close to the Scorpio region. There is another very thin, dense, faint part of the Milky Way which actually runs like this near the Orion, but it's not that bright to get captured through any camera. So the same thing, cropped. So anyone recognize this?
Rajat sir,
Yes, sir.
is it Orion Nebula?
Yes. This is the Orion Nebula, and I've taken with the original pics of ISO 3200, not ISO 400, because my shutter speed was quite low. My shutter speed was some fraction of a second. Why? Because I had to zoom in a lot to take such pics. And if you're zooming a lot, then if your shutter speed is say greater than 3 seconds or 4 seconds, then the stars will start to show the trailing effects, right? So you want to avoid trailing when you want to stack the pictures, right? So I fixed the shutter speed to some 1/50 or something, smaller shutter speed, but I let my ISO to be held at 3200. So maximum ISO, but low shutter speed, and zoomed in. And I took some 12 or 13 pics and I stacked them. And the result is here. You can see the clouds, the star forming region. Yeah. So I have some time and then I'll show you more about the software I use for stacking. So this is the Sequator software. I'll run you through the interface. This option is for star images. What it means is that you're able to collect the pictures that you want to stack in this option. And wait, let me show you a demonstration. Click on star images, and then I'll go to my folder where I have the images. I'll select these. Open. All these images have been selected. And you might have recognized this. This is the Tamarin tree that I was talking about, and this is the Scorpio, and the Milky Way is supposedly here. But you won't be able to see the Milky Way even after stacking because these pics are from mobile camera. With mobile camera, this is the original quality pics, and I've taken several of these identical pics. And so you go to composition. You don't want it to be on trails. You want it to be on aligned stars and accumulation. Sky region, you'll select the sky region, and as I've said, you'll find it difficult to select the sky region near very random things like this tree. So this part of the sky won't get processed. So all the stars, many tiny stars we're able to see, those were actually noise pollution, noise, RGB noise pixels. So you'll select the sky region, and if you have some random things like this, then it will create the distortion effects that I showed you near the pole, the ground pole, the leads one. Try to avoid the boundary regions. So once you have selected the region you want to process, then you will go to auto brightness on. This is an important one. High dynamic range off. I don't know what that means. If anyone has any idea, then please you can talk. Remove dynamic noises, yes. Reduce distortion effects, yes, because you need to reduce the distortion effects from here. Reduce light pollution, yes, because you're in a city. Enhance starlight, yes, because you have taken this pics with mobile camera, you want to enhance your starlight. Merge 4 pixels. If say each of the original pic is of 10 MB and you have taken 10 pics and you want to stack the 10 pics, then the final image will be of some 100 MB, right? 10 into 10, 100. And if you want your final result to be of a lower quality, say 25 MB, then you will merge 4 pixels. So what it will do is it will select 4 close pixels and it will merge them to 1 pixel. So it will result in a bit contrasting image, but also with a reduced quality. So you all can see this, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'll start. But first I have to assign the output file. Okay. Where is the output? Yeah. So in output, pictures, demo. And the files will be saved as .tir, uncompressed, save, and then I'll start. So depending on the number of pics taken and the quality, the process of stacking might take some time. And all these pics are from mobile camera, right? But you'll see the final result. It will just be amazing. Those, oof. I think I messed up something, but you'll see the starlights have been enhanced. How can I? Zoom is blocking. Okay, wait. Open. Yeah. These zoom options are troubling. Okay, brightness. Then it's up to you, like how you want to organize your final result. And also, I was very bad in selecting the region. So that's why you see all this distortion effect. So as far as possible, you want to avoid random things in your pic. So you can just play around, but your final pic, if you have noticed, it will show just too many stars than your original pic. These stars weren't visible, but now they are. Okay. So if anyone has any questions, then you can ask. Then if I have time, then I can show you some of the extra pics.
How about the shining meteors on the?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Also, Prateek had a question. So first, you could talk about the meteors, and then we'll talk about what Prateek has to say.
So the thing is, why are these regions more brighter? So it's not about photography, but it's about the science, chemical compositions, and astrophysics in general. So whenever there is a big impact, so it will increase the amount of certain substances like sodium and all, because meteors are quite rich in things like calcium, sodium, iron, and nickel. So it also, like if you try to hit something really hard, then it gives quite a lot of energy, right? The energy will melt those regions away, and it generally looks quite bright. So I'm not a very
And like,
professional.
what is the time frame of these meteor impacts? Like,
No.
like are they like are these on day scale, or what is the scale here?
I would say millions and millions of years. Like these
Also,
aren't.
so the extra chemical persists to a long time.
Yeah, because there isn't
Okay.
any biological process active on erode those chemicals away, right? And it's not just chemicals. The whole process of forming a crater usually leaves quite a lot of bright things around. Like the impact is responsible for it. I can't very definitively say the pure science behind it, but this is the rough answer.
Okay, thanks.
I personally prefer to do astrophotography with my mobile camera, because you start with one thing and you end up with a completely different thing. Like I didn't expect to see so many stars. Like the original pics which I had taken, I was able to see only the stars of the Ursa Major, and some of one of those or two stars over here. But the rest of the stars, all these stars, they became apparent only after the stacking process was complete. So when you do stacking, it is essentially like you're taking a big 300 second or 400 seconds exposure. So like any camera won't provide you that much of exposure. So the trick you do is that you take, say, like you fix your exposure shutter speed to 30 seconds. And if you take 10 pics, then that is a total exposure of 13 to 10. That is 300 seconds worth of exposure will let you see these many stars. I also have some pics from last year that I want to show. Okay. What happened? Yeah. So this is the same phenomena, earth shine. You see the dark side of the moon is quite illuminated. And here is Venus.
I don't think you're. We still see the stacked image with the stars.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, at least I do. But my Zoom is terrible. So, Kavya?
He's right. Yes.
Wait.
You can still see the earlier image. No. Okay, you're sharing again.
Now?
Yes, we can see the moon image.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
So this is the earth shine phenomena. The dark side of the moon is illuminated by the Earth's reflected light. And this was a pretty simple pic. Moon is over here. You see that random tamarind tree. Here is Jupiter, I suppose. Here was Saturn, and this was the Scorpio region. I want to show you this pic quite particularly. You see this? Anyone knows what this might be?
Is it nearby, Rajat sir?
Yes. Nishan sir, you actually know a lot about my picks that other people also try to guess. And what about this? What might be this?
A meteor or a comet, call it.
This is actually the International Space Station. So while I was taking this pic, the New White's comet was really very bright, but I wasn't able to capture it since it was monsoon. So it was very bright in the months of July 2020. But when I took this pic, it was September, and the brightness was reduced to a fifth or sixth magnitude. But still, like at that time, I didn't know the process of stacking, or else if I would have stacked, then the comet would have appeared much more brighter and stronger. So the International Space Station just happened to be flying across, and I took that pic. And here is the comet. Here is a solar eclipse, partial solar eclipse. So I took my professional camera and I took some of my grandfather's X-ray, and I took 2 or 3 X-rays and took the dark region of it and tried to protect myself and the camera, and I took this picture. This is Mars. Not that quite good, because like if you have to photograph planets, then you may need telescope. Even with good cameras, it's quite difficult to zoom in that much and take a good pic. It's quite pixelated. You may also recognize it.
So this was with a camera?
Yeah, the Canon, my professional camera.
Okay. We have 2 questions. One is Pratik and one is Harsh. So, Pratik, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. So I wanted to ask Rajat sir that how do you know the location of all these planets and stars? Like, you're so confident about what is what. Like, I know that these are your picks, so you might be doing them. But like, if I ask you that I live in New Delhi, so can you tell me which planet will be can be found in which direction in the night sky? So like, how do you know that? Is that by just by experience or what?
I would say 50% experience because like I roughly know which constellations would be on what part of the year. Like if it's in some winter month like November, December, January, then you will obviously be able to see the Orion region, Pleiades, Taurus, and all. And if you are in summer months like April, May, June, July, August, then the Scorpio, Sagittarius region will be visible throughout the night. So I basically have a rough idea, but I also sometimes use softwares like Stellarium, but not that much. But there is a website called as Heavens Above. It has information regarding a lot of things. So if I want to plan something very rigorously, then I visit the website and then check about the location of planets if I want. But I roughly have some ideas. Like if you wake up early, then in the southern eastern part of the sky, you will be able to see Venus right now. Regarding Jupiter, I think it won't be visible. And Mars, I think Mars is also visible in the early morning sky. And also, you live in New Delhi, so it's practically impossible that you will be able to capture some good pics because I've been to New Delhi and the night sky just looks as good as the day sky. It's just so bright. You can't see a single star, unfortunately. You might have to go somewhere else. You're muted.
Yeah, thanks.
Also, I'm just a second year person, so don't call me sir. Harsh, you had a question, right?
Yeah, Bhaiya, how do we should photograph meteor showers?
Meteor showers are quite difficult to photograph. Like if you have a mobile camera, you can photograph them, but you have to be extremely lucky. Like firstly, you will have to select some dates. There are particular dates in the year, like say 4th of January, or say 13th or 14th of December, or say 12th or 13th of August. These particular dates have quite some significance because they are meteor shower dates. Like on the 4th of January, you will be able to see the Quadrantids meteor shower. So if you're lucky, in an hour, you should be able to capture some 20 or 30 meteors if you live in a good, quite relatively dark place. But the thing is, most of the professional astrophotographers who take meteor showers, and most of us won't be able to do it. Like they have very sensitive and good cameras that can just scan the sky for hours together. Like their effective exposure time is for hours. So in a single pic, they're able to capture some 20 or 30 shooting stars. So those cameras are quite expensive, and it's quite unlikely that you might get a chance to capture meteors. But it's up to luck. Like if your 15-second shutter camera is on, and in that 15 second, if a particular meteor appears, then you're just too lucky.
Okay, and one more question. How do you get rid of star trails? In my phone, when I try a 30-second exposure, I see that all the stars move a bit.
Yeah. So the reason is I choose 30-second exposure with phone is that phones aren't that quite great instruments, right? So you want to maximize the amount of light you get, but you will also have to compromise something. And the compromise here is that you will get star trails. If you want to avoid star trails, then you may prefer a 20-second or 25-second exposure, or even a 15-second exposure. But then like the noise reduction won't be that much, and you will necessarily have to do stacking to capture the whole composite image. Star trails you won't get rid of star trails if your shutter speed is at 30 seconds, but the star trailing effect isn't that much recognizable with 30 seconds. But yeah.
But it will matter if I do stacking, because if I keep the camera in one position, then click one photo, then after 5 minutes.
Yeah. So the thing is, when I'm wait, let me show you. Okay. So you see the screen, right?
Yes.
So when I'm selecting the sky region, I'm selecting a particular region of the sky. And so what the software does is that it will map all the stars in that region, and then it will align the remaining stars accordingly. So it's just not simple stacking. It is actually aligning and stacking. So you see here, the composition is aligned stars. So even if the stars have moved a bit over here, it will fix the stars to the original point. Do you get it? It will align the stars. It will select all the stars in the selected region, and then it will align, and then only it will stack. If you don't want to align, then say, like I go here, and it was in align stars. And if I don't do align stars, then naturally it will get into trails. Do you get it?
Okay, got it.
Because I've selected this align stars option, I won't be getting trails. If I don't select align stars option, if I select this option, trails, then I'll end up with trails. Let's see what happens. So I'll start. So I've selected the trails option. You see? Can you see the trail?
Yes, understood. Even the trail of a tree.
A what?
What had happened with the tree?
Yeah. Some problem, I guess. One of the images wasn't aligned properly. That's why, yeah. So these kind of problem will occur most often if you have random things like this. So you want to avoid such things in your pics, in the original pics. Try to avoid it. But I think I didn't select the sky region very properly. That's why this problem happened. But you see you're able to see the trails, right? So in the 30 minutes of the time I was clicking the pics, the stars had moved by this amount.
Okay, understood.
Any other question?
Not a question per se. I just wanted to note the star trail phenomena is also an example of blur due to longer exposure times.
Yeah.
And as you said, you shoot at 30 seconds. And my point basically is to illustrate that sometimes very slow motion can also be captured over very fast time. So that rule of thumb I was saying, it's just that, a rule of thumb. It also depends on lenses, what your shutter speed is to eliminate blur. And at the end of the day, you just have to try sometimes to get.
It's also part of failing. Like astrophotography will teach you a lot about failure and patience. And you have to try a lot of things before you get a final successful pick. It's just a lot about experience.
Anyways, thank you, Raja. Thanks a lot. We now move on to Vikram, who will be talking about macrophotography. Hi.
There's no lag or anything?
No, we can hear you.
All right, hold on. I'll just share this thing. to the lens itself. Clicking anything other than plants when I'm taking my macro lens out. So this particular photo is the seed head of a common sunflower plant. It's a common garden plant, and these are just the seed heads for it. The only reason I included this photo is to show that done this captured automatically in everything that I had, just so that you guys could, you'll have them for reference, for example. So this one, for example, was a non-tripod photo. And coming back to botanical information that I wanted it to have, I wanted this one to be explicitly 3D, because I wanted to emphasize that it is not, that it is it is thick inflorescence that does have, it's not, okay, how do I phrase this? It's thick essentially. Apart from that, as you can see, the stamens are in focus, some of the stigmas are in focus, and you can also see some pollen grains on the stigma, and those are some of the things that I wanted to capture for record keeping in this, which is why I took this photo. Apart from that, nothing too much to comment on this. Okay, so for all the image metadata, I just ignore the height and width in pixels, because I do crop some of my photos, and the time is, the dates are correct, although the specific timestamp has, it's off by a certain number of hours, I don't remember, but everything else is accurate. All right. So this example for so this one and the next one just show that I typically take photos of the same thing from different angles. This one was a more general shot to capture the entire plant, whereas this one was specifically for capturing the disc florets. Again, for me, clarity supersedes aesthetic beauty, so to say. So, for example, I would ideally not have a photo that has this out of focus leaf blocking some of the things, for example. But I don't particularly care for it right now, because I want this part of the image to be, like, for example, the fact that there are individual petals here and that this thing is bilobed, and things of that sort are more important to me right now and are what I'm focusing on. So I'm just living with things like blurred, out of focus parts that may not be the most well composed shots. As a side note, this and many of the following photos were taken on campus on I think 17th or 18th September. So post monsoon, mostly self-grown flora is found in the photos that follow. All right, another thing that I sometimes like to do is, even when I'm shooting in full daylight, I like to use flash, as you can see here. I like to use flash in extremely high ISO values. For I used to use I'm not ISO also, sorry, extremely high f-stop values with low ISOs, and the shortest exposure time I can get away with. So what this lets me do is this prevents me from having to focus check because I've taken such a large aperture, and it reduces shake because I'm often without a tripod, and having a tripod at certain angles can be very cumbersome. And because the ISO is so low, it image clarity and noise is also pretty good. So what this lets me do, so while I have to live with certain drawbacks of this, like having slightly sharper shadows, usually all I'm left with is a fairly clear image, except for some minor color correction that I sometimes have to do, which I have, by the way, not done for any of these photos so far. So this, like I said, is something that I moving or positioning your camera extremely close to the subject, which blocks out ambient light. So you often have to do this. The flash I use is the inbuilt default flash that the camera comes with. I don't have an external flash. Now this is another example of the same thing. Again, this particular image made the cut because all floral parts are accurately and this is a species of ground orchid, and I found it growing on a random roadside in somewhere in Satara district. So why I included this photo was to show that not all the photos I take are of extremely small objects. For context, most of the past 4 or 5 photos have the flowers themselves are not more than maybe 3 or 4 millimeters across. This one, on the other hand, was around this big, the entire thing. I think it's a 1:1, 1:1 ratio image. As you can see, some of the settings are different, but apart from that, not too much to comment on this. Lastly, this is just an example of a photo that of a non-plant subject for the photo. I put this in just to show that they are not the only things I take photos of. Unfortunately, I don't have most of my images sorted, and they're still on my SD card, so I don't have too many of these right now. And that's pretty much all I have to say about this. Of course, very general compositional principles are there, right? So for example, don't fully center your subject, and having them slightly offset helps. For example, here the subject is this smaller male spider, and so it's the one that's fully in focus, while some parts of the larger female become and blur to the background. Anything else that I missed? Not particularly, I think. All right, would anyone like to say anything?
Any questions, guys? I mean, nobody's raised hands. There's nobody in the chat either.
Nothing. All right. in that case, what would you like me to do?
I think we can call it a day. Thanks a lot, Vikram.
All right, sure, no problem.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
That was a good
Bye.
presentation.
Yeah.
All right.
Stop sharing.
Thank you guys for showing up.
Yeah.
And we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see your entries in science in your backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you guys for organizing it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Arshit.
All right then.
You're
We'll
welcome.
stop the recording.
All right, let's end this.
All right.